Welcome, everyone, to our Packers News Camp Chat, our very first of 2020, virtually alongside Jim Owczarski. I am Olivia Reiner. The Packers veterans returned to Lambeau Field for the beginning of training camp today for the very first time. However, things are going to be looking a little bit different for the first few weeks of training camps. No bikes, as we're used to them, no fans, and for a few more weeks, no football. Additionally, they'll also be down a player because he decided to opt out due to coronavirus concerns. We will get to that in just a moment. However, before we start, I want to remind all of you, if you're new here, welcome. We're happy to have you. It's good to see you again. Please, if you have a question or a comment, a concern, whatever's on your mind, make sure to leave a comment down in the Facebook chat or in the YouTube comments, and we will get to some of those toward the end of our discussion today. Let's start with the big news, Chim, right away. Just broke a few minutes ago. Wide receiver Devin Funchess has announced that he is opting out of the 2020 season due to coronavirus concerns. He posted this very message on Instagram explaining his decision to opt out. It sounds like he has had some personal experience in his family dealing with COVID-19 in the last couple of months, and he's made this decision because of his family to take a step away from the game this season. Now, what's interesting about Devin Funchess is he's the only real wide receiver addition to the Packers core with previous NFL experience this offseason. He signed a one-year deal with the Packers worth about $2.5 million. What exactly happens to Funchess's contract this season?
Yeah, so he will not count against the roster at any point. If you opt out, the union basically said, and the league agreed, it's essentially irrevocable. So he's gone. What that means, though, is he is under contract for 2021. And really all it means is, his money is kind of moved. That won't really be on the books or on the cap, as a full amount, but it will be for next year. So Brian Gutekunst, Russ Ball can plan for that in the 2021 salary cap. Really, the only difference for Devin Funchess is he received his signing bonus when he signed his contract. That's what that is. You do not get that again. So, it's not like he gets another signing bonus or anything like that. So really, he has some stability for 2021. The Packers know he'll be on the roster at least whenever that season starts, and then they can make whatever roster decisions with him after that.
The Packers are going to have to dig into their reserves to think about who exactly is going to replace Devin Funchess at the receiver position. It depends. Perhaps they decide to look elsewhere for receiver help. However, they do have some players in-house that could potentially step up and fill Funchess's or just some position on the receivers line in their room, in their shoes. There's players like wide receiver Darius Shepard, or even someone that the Packers brought in this offseason, the Canadian Football League, Reggie Begelton, who is the next man up on the Packers roster.
Yeah, this news has to, grind Packers fans' gears, if you will, Olivia. I mean, he was, as you mentioned at the top here, the one addition to the room anyone knew anything about. No draft pick. So, yeah, it's status quo. I think Funchess was a roster lock. So I guess that means one of those spots is open. Darius Shepard made the team out of camp last year. I think, being a second-year guy and with all of the time these players have missed, there's got to be a benefit there for a player like him. I think even this bumps up a Jake Kumro to a degree. I mean, we know how Aaron Rodgers feels about him, Olivia, but I think Kumro's a guy who always is going to have to fight and prove in camp that he deserves to be on the initial 53. Begelton's the interesting one. I mean, he was a star last year in the CFL, but again, nobody knows what he can do. We know how tough Aaron Rodgers can be on his receivers. Who's he going to be working with? Is he going to be in Tim Boyle's group, Jordan Love's group? If that's the case, can anyone really know what he can do to make the team? So my gut right now, Olivia, is you look at last year's opening 53 and Allen Lazard. who was called up after that. And that's your group. And then someone else, whoever that may be, would have to really, really show out in limited practice time to have Matt LaFleur and the quarterbacks trust him that they can win games, once they start.
There's some time, but not a lot of time for receivers that haven't had a lot of face time with this Packers coaching staff to step up this offseason and the remainder of training camp to show exactly what they are made of in the coming week. So let's take a look at what the schedule is this training camp. It looks a little bit different, as you might notice. So the Packers today reported to Lambeau to receive the first of 3 COVID-19 tests. They'll be tested 3 times over 4 days, and on the 5th day, the players can officially enter the facility for physicals and for equipment. Now, Jim, what happens if a player is diagnosed with the coronavirus after 2 negative tests?
Yeah, that's the important distinction here, because as I'm sure Packers fans already know, as we record this, linebacker Greg Roberts tested positive coming in. So he's already now in a quarantine situation. If a player tests negative twice and then is diagnosed with it, the team can move him to a football injury list. And why that's an important designation for the player is they get paid. They don't count against the roster. And they're kind of put on it's like a temporary IR, if you will. So once they recovered, they're cleared, they can come back to the roster. Now, if they test negative and then the team finds out they engaged in what the NFL and the PA deem high-risk behavior, which they've outlined, that's going to a club, a bar, a restaurant, a church, or religious service with various amounts of people, then the team can put them on a non-football injury list. And then that means that player does not get paid. So important distinctions, but they are distinctions we may be covering as this all unfolds for the Packers over the next month and a half.
Yeah, 2 important distinctions there in between football injury and non-football injury. It all comes down to the money. A lot, as we've mentioned throughout our live stream, a lot is looking different with this training camp because of the nature of coronavirus and how it's impacted not only football, but just our lives in general. Training camp rosters are also going to be looking different this upcoming training camp. By August 16th, the team must whittle their roster down from technically 89 now the Packers have on their roster to 80. If the Packers elect to wait till that August 16th date, they need to break up the team when they have them in the facility. They can't have more than 80 players in the facility at once, which kind of begs the question, Jim, why is Brian Gutekunst waiting to cut down 8 to 10 players on his roster if he's just going to have to cut them down eventually at some point?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, Brian Gutekunst in his short time as GM has always wanted the most amount of players that he's allowed to have for the longest amount of time. So even when, or previous camps, if he got, below 90, he wanted to make a waiver claim and get to 90. That's the talent evaluator in him. But as we've seen around the league, a bunch of teams didn't wait. They just cut 10 guys. The Pack, I guess he would say he would want to finally see some of these undrafted free agents, or maybe a Jamal Davis, the Hester guy that they claimed that they signed, players they legitimately haven't seen, at least in some capacity. But you're right, Olivia. I mean, you on the slide, it's just this gradual workout period. I mean, they're not even going to be in pads by the time he's got to make this decision. So, it could be that he's anticipating some hamstrings or a shoulder. I mean, the Packers had a bad run of offensive linemen, tearing arm ligaments in practice and a knee ligament in practice. So maybe he's thinking, let's get through the physicals. And maybe Cole Madison can't start right away. Maybe Stepaniak, the draft pick with his ACL, can't start right away. And they can put them right away on a PUP list and sort of whittle the roster you hate to say organically, but kind of organically without just putting guys on the street that he had invested so much scouting time into. So I think that's why, to be honest. I think they want to get through this first period, Olivia, whereas other teams obviously just said, forget it. Let's just get to 80 and then we'll worry about all that other stuff later.
I'll add to that now with Devin Funchess out of the picture with his decision to opt out of the 2020 season. The Packers only have to figure out the next 8 players who aren't going to be with the team by August 16th. That could mean that maybe Brian Gutekunst is waiting to see exactly all of his players, who they are before the opt-out window closes, which at the moment would be on August 4th is the last day that players can decide to opt out. So we may be seeing some more players in the coming days deciding to opt out. We don't know. We'll find out soon enough. Let's head over to Facebook and YouTube to look at some of our questions from our lovely viewers. Thank you all for joining us today. We'll start with Katie, and I think this is an important distinction here. Katie says, with Greg Roberts, outside linebacker, placed on the COVID IR list that the NFL has instituted, does that mean he tested positive or he's just in quarantine? When will we know the results of today's tests? I think what's important to know about this list is that it doesn't necessarily mean that he tested positive. It could mean that he's come in contact with someone that tested positive too. So there's that distinction there. Jim, I don't know if we'll ever know the results of these tests. We just might know if they end up on this list, which could mean, again, one of two things, that the player either tests positive or that they've come in contact with someone who's tested positive.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right, Katie and Olivia. You'll know who was positive in whatever fashion with that designation. And then I would assume, and I think you can assume, if you hear nothing about a player, then they have been negative. And that will continue. Now, that also doesn't mean they will be past their physical August 1st and 2nd, as I alluded to, Cole Madison or Stepaniak, guys with injuries, maybe they can't place past their physical 1st or 2nd and are placed on IR. Now, I'm sure mechanisms will leak out why they were put on IR, if they're not on the COVID IR designation. So I think it's one of those where you'll just kind of have to wait to see where these players are placed, or honestly, if they are not placed anywhere.
Thank you so much for your question, Katie. We'll go to Jeff now. Jeff asks, because Devin Funchess' contract tolls to next season, do the Packers have additional cap room with Funchess deciding to opt out? According to Over the Cap, which I have up here, his cap number this season was set to be about $2.3 million. Jim, what happens to that money?
It's a great question. I don't have that exact breakdown in front of me as this news broke right before we went live here. Good question, Jeff. I know there is a cap ramification with the I don't know if Devin Funchess is in the high risk category because of his family situation. So there's a $200,000 difference there. Usually if a contract tolls, I don't think the teams are hit twice for that. So I can't say for sure, but I do believe there would be some relief. I think the Packers were about to roll over about $11 million into 21 anyway. But yeah, having, if they can get an extra $1 million, then extra 700,000, I'm sure they would take it. But we'll find out. Obviously, check out our tweets and anything we write as we'll get to the bottom of that for sure. That's
a really interesting question too, because if that $2.3 million in cap relief comes this season versus next season, that's an important distinction, especially for the Packers, who have 2021 impending free agents in running back Aaron Jones, left tackle David Bakhtiari, defensive tackle Kenny Clark. So you can go on and on. I think every little bit of space counts, and they have a long list of players they need to consider when it comes to having some of that cap space roll over into this upcoming free agency in the offseason. So it's a good question, and I think we'll have to do a little bit of digging, figuring that one out. Let's I saw somebody in the comments had suggested he wanted to discuss more about Jake Kummerow. I'll try to, as we'll talk a little bit more about him. Jim, what is for Kummerow? What is the next step for him to get out on the field a little bit more and to see some more opportunity with the Packers this upcoming season?
Yeah, I think Alan Lazard laid the blueprint, right? There we go, Andrew. The preferred nickname for Jake Kummerow. I think it's the Alan Lazard method, right? Like, Lazard had done whatever was necessary in practice to have him get that call against Detroit, right? And then he made the most of it, made a couple of contested catches, right? And then became kind of the guy. And that's what happens when you're at that. I mean, remember, Alan Lazard didn't make the team coming out of camp. I think they knew, they'd pull him up after a week. But, Kummerow's, I think, in the same boat where, he'd have to make the most of whatever few opportunities there are. I mean, I can think of the Los Angeles game. The receivers had a bad day that day, but I know he had a drop. That would have been a big play. And, that's one play I'm remembering, but that's the thing. How many opportunities are there for that guy? And those types of guys, they're few. Especially as this offense evolves, and if we see Jay Sternberger and Josiah DeGuara and more often, or A.J. Dillon and Aaron Jones together, for instance, I mean, that's just fewer receivers on the field, and you already know Devontae Adams is one of them. So I think that's the only way to do it. Continue to impress Aaron Rodgers and the coaches in practice. And then when you get that one or two shots in a game, really make it count and make it hard for them to not pencil you in the next time.
And Todd also mentions that this is an opportunity for Packers wide receiver Equanimeous St. Brown, who spent all of last season on injured reserve. As I believe our colleague Ryan Wood wrote in his position preview for the wide receivers going into training camp, anybody who can make a play at this point has a very good shot at making an impact on this team, and especially in the wide receiving core. So whether it's Equanimeous St. Brown, whether it's Jake Kummerow or somebody else, the opportunity for you is out there. Let's take another question or a comment, a thought from, I believe, Southwest Florida Packers fan club. This person suggests that the only way that the NFL season might work out if it's in some sort of bubble scenario. We've seen in this past week with the MLB, the Miami Marlins had a number of players and coaches test positive for the coronavirus. They are not in a bubble scenario. However, the NBA down in Orlando has had some success, a lot of success relatively, at least very early on, in keeping the virus out of what they have constructed, their bubble down at Disney World. The NHL just arrived in their 2 hub cities up in Canada. So we'll see exactly if they're able to do a good job of keeping the virus out of the season. Jim, what does the NFL believe that it's doing to create a bubble-like environment around the country, around the teams, even though they're not technically in a bubble whatsoever?
Yeah, I mean, I think our colleague Tom Silverstein would agree with you. Southwest Florida Packers fan club, I think, they're trying to create their mini bubbles in their own respective cities by canceling all the preseason games, canceling, joint practices. So, and while they aren't tracking players with GPS or anything to that degree, instituting fines and discipline and the ability to really hurt a guy financially for conduct detrimental, which look, NFL players really don't want to be fined. Even if it's 15, 20 grand and they're making millions of dollars. I mean, Jimmy Graham didn't want to take that fine for the media fine last year, and he was making $10 million. So, are guys going to go out to the bars and restaurants? Sure. But I think that's what the NFL is trying to create, is that sense of personal responsibility to themselves, to their teammates. You mentioned the Miami Marlins, Olivia. I'm sure there will be a big point of emphasis on that from the health folks at each club. Now, in terms of travel, I think what the NFL hopes is, unlike other sports, they can fly in the night before and stay kind of locked in there. Normally, teams rent out entire floors of whatever hotel they're staying in anyway. So ideally, in their case, they'll work it out with the hotel that those rooms are empty, 24, 48 hours ahead of time and lock in. And I mean, they're on their plane home, 60 minutes, Olivia, after the game ends. So I think they're hoping that these things they have in place work as a little bubble in and of itself. But like anything, it's about personal responsibility. And, we've seen how well or not well that's worked in the general population.
It's a good question, and we'll certainly see how it plays out. And then we'll also see if there is an outbreak like there is right now on the Marlins, what happens to the rest of the league? How does that impact the rest of the teams and their operations and the operations of the NFL and the schedule? So all things to keep an eye on going forward. We'll take this next question here again from Katie. I think this is also something that we didn't discuss yet today, and an important little nugget of information. Katie says it's easier for players to go to the practice squad and come off of it without waivers, correct? Looking for some clarification there. And I think it's important to note the practice squad size has been increased to 16 players, so they can have a little bit more flexibility. There's also some technicality about who can be on the practice squad. You can have a few more accrued seasons in the league and still be on practice squad than in years past. And it's also true that you don't have to pass through waivers to go to the practice squad or vice versa. So there's a little bit more flexibility for teams that are looking to stash some players on the practice squad just in case they have to put players on that COVID-19 list going forward.
Yeah, no, it's and I think that was a necessary addition, to be able to kind of shuffle guys. Because look, I mean, a player could test positive, Saturday night, Sunday morning, and all of a sudden be unavailable for the game. So the ability to bring up a player immediately, and then once that other player comes back, it's just honestly, it would have been too complicated and frankly a little unfair to have to subject those practice squad guys to waivers every time around. I mean, it's just it just wouldn't really work. And some adjustments have to be made, and I think that was a smart one by the NFL.
Lots of adjustments going on, lots of little rules, things that we're still getting used to too. And hopefully if we have any new information, more clarification, again, regarding with Funchess and how his cap hit impacts this season or next season, hopefully we'll have some more details for you coming soon shortly. So if you're new, thank you so much for joining us. We will have lots more for you in the coming days with the start of training camp over on PackersNews.com. Make sure you're following us on all of our social media platforms as well. We love to post some updates and interact with all of you over there too. Have a good one, everyone. We'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.